Hi, thanks for joining us for another episode of TPS Traffic Jam. That's where we talk about traffic, we jam. And joining me are Karen and Robyn, and they're with TIRF. TIRF is the Traffic Injury Research Foundation. Welcome back.
Good to see you, Sean.
Great to be back.
It is always fun. We have a great time whenever we do this. And we're talking about different stuff. Last time we got together, the last episode was all about pandemic-related trends, things we were seeing, driver behavior that was obviously risky and dangerous, and how it was affecting in what we saw. So if you haven't seen that episode and you're watching now, please go back and watch it because it was a great episode. But we're talking about distracted driving today. And, there's so much to talk about distracted driving. It is one of those things that we see everywhere. It seems that it's an epidemic. In that we cannot get people to stop touching their devices. There's a lot of people who think it's acceptable, or if they stop their car, it's okay. And, the laws have changed in Ontario anyway. I remember when it was $125, and then it just kept getting up and up and up because it wasn't conveying a change in behavior, or it wasn't creating a change in behavior. So they raised it and raised it. Now it's $615. It comes with a 3-day license suspension, 3 demerit points on the first conviction, but it goes up from there. And folks don't like getting tickets like that, but we still see the problem. So what are you seeing where you are?
Well, actually, I have. As soon as you were talking about that, I have a short, funny story for you. So in BC, our legislation, like yours, it keeps going up. They kind of come up with, how do we get drivers to put these devices down and focus on the task of driving? So one of the last rounds of increasing sanctions and fines, I got invited to go down to the Parliament buildings, and there was this whole presentation with our local law enforcement with the fines going up, and then we did media after the fact, and I did a live call-in show, and one of the callers got on the phone and was really upset about how high the fine was, because how is he supposed to be able to feed himself or pay rent if he has to pay such a high fine?
The logic of, if you don't break the law, you don't have to pay is exactly. It was lost on him.
My filter just fell right off, and I just basically said that. I'm like, there's a really simple solution. Don't touch your phone while you're driving, and then you'll have all the money you need to eat and pay your rent. But that thought process to me was just so astounding. It's not like you don't have a choice. This is something that you are choosing to engage in, knowing that if you get caught, and the chances are pretty good because it's such a big priority for law enforcement because it injures and kills people. So just don't do it.
But it's any offense, right? Like there's laws for everything, and we get TikTok. We have a huge following. We just hit 560,000 followers, and which is amazing. But at the same time, one of the most common things is we talk about fines and offenses, and it's a cash grab. Well, it's only a cash grab if you choose to, become involved in that kind of behavior. And even then, it's not a cash grab. But it's not. There's no grab. You have to donate it. You have to choose to do the thing that breaks the law, that results in a police officer taking action. And the fact that people can't separate those two things, I just don't know how to. I don't know. I don't know. What do you say?
Well, and I think, like, as a criminologist, fines play an important role in shaping people's behavior because it does create a deterrent effect. You get a fine, you pay it, and it's like, I don't want to pay that again, so I'm not going to do that again. And I think increasing penalties is a good thing. And we saw, since 2008, when distracted driving legislation came in, it came in with more often fines, and then in 2013, 2014, we saw jurisdictions across the country steadily increase and add those demerit points to kind of up the penalty. But I think there's a proportion of us, fines don't change our behavior. We're not motivated by the fine. And having talked to law enforcement across the country, often you get some drivers where it's like, just give me the ticket and let me get on my way. So obviously it's not having effect. And I think it just speaks to the need that we need to look at other tools and strategies to try and convince those people who are so invested in the distracted driving to make different choices.
We call it education through enforcement, and it sounds terrible, but when you're trying to convey or a change of behavior, it's that positive or negative enforcement. I've pulled people over and given warnings. I've pulled people over, obviously, and given tickets. Sometimes I've just pulled people over to say, you're doing a great job. And each one of those interactions has a different effect. There's arguments to see which one is the best one. I guess the jury's still out. But there are many people who have received tickets and continue to receive the same the same tickets on an ongoing basis. It's not a one and done. It seems to be that there is such a high dependency on those tools that you can't put them down. And I've pulled people over and said, okay, I'm going to give you a ticket, but you're going to put that in the trunk, and then you can continue to drive, because you just what they were doing was so egregious. They were driving and looking down. Some people argue that before the laws were introduced to make it illegal, it was safer because you could have your phone in front of your face, and it was you didn't have to look down to hide. But again, excuses for why they're doing what they're doing.
Yeah, and I think the unfortunate reality is drivers who drive distracted, by virtue of the fact that they are fortunate and not crash involved, gives them the idea that they're actually safe. And the reality is you're not safe. You're just lucky that the unexpected didn't happen in front of you at that moment. So I think the reinforcement they get from doing it persistently and not being crash involved really sends the wrong message that needs to be addressed.
And I think one of the things we've talked about a few times before, Robyn, which is a really good way, I think, for people to look at it, is they'll measure their driving ability by whether or not they've been in a crash. But if you switch that around and you look at how many times have you been in a near miss or near hit, however you want to phrase it, almost all of us, either as a pedestrian, cyclist, driver, whatever it is, near misses happen all the time. So if you start to take a step back and look at what were the factors, what changed it, that it was only a near miss and not a collision, because one of our most common sayings is the difference between a close call and a collision is measured literally in millimeters and microseconds. It's a fraction of time. And I think a lot of people tend to think about distracted driving in particular as it's a big thing. It's if I'm looking away for like 5 or 10 seconds, or it's really egregious. It's a moment. It's just a moment in time.
And you never know when that moment comes.
And as you mentioned in the last episode, daydreaming. You don't have to necessarily be using your phone to be distracted and not focused on the task at hand. Just being lost in your thoughts can leave you in a position where you end up in a collision. I posted a video a couple days ago on our TikTok account that has someone making a lane change on the Don Valley Parkway, and they waited for the first car to go by, and then they immediately initiated their, I assume, didn't make a shoulder check, because if they did, they wouldn't have cut off and almost caused a collision. But is that a situation you go, wow, that was close, and then change your behavior going forward, or just keep doing the exact same thing? Because I don't know how someone continues to do the same thing. I think they call that, I don't know what they call that.
Or even if they're even aware that they almost caused a collision. Like lots of times you see it unfolding on the road ahead of you, and the driver just continues on, and it's like, did you realize that you almost caused a collision? So I think the near miss doesn't even register.
Well, yeah, there's those that sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think it comes down to people's motivation, and a lot of that has to do with their personality. So I am well known for being a rule follower. My friends in high school and beyond talked about the fact I am so square.
And your colleagues. Yeah.
I'm so square. I'm a cube. Like, breaking the rules does not come easily to me. So for me, the deterrent is I would be mortified. Absolutely mortified if I got found breaking a traffic rule. So that is enough for me. But other people are motivated by emotion or whatever it is. And in BC, so the distracted driving legislation came in February of 2010. And at that point, I'd already been crash involved twice upon moving to BC, and neither were my fault. One, I was going through a green light, and then the other, I was just driving down the road and someone pulled out of a side street and just drove into the side of me. That person, at the time, it didn't register with me, but they said at the time, they were very apologetic, unlike the first person. And they just said, I don't know what happened. I put my car in gear and I didn't put my brain in gear. I literally didn't see you until I was in your car, like I had driven into you. And it wasn't until I started this Drop It and Drive program that operates under TIRF that I started really looking into the science of distraction. Because at the time I was 20, so I was like, "What do you mean you didn't see me? I'm a big blue car. It's daytime. It's not raining. It's like, how do you not see me?" And then I started to learn about, as amazing as our brains are, the limitations of what they can process and what starts to get missed. And when you were talking, Sean, at the beginning about that driver doing 150, one of our recent podcasts that we did with TPS was on speed and distraction. And looking at it from the distracted driving perspective, Transport Canada did this great study about field of view that demonstrates how your field of view shrinks when you're cognitively distracted. It's not just about what is in your hands and where your eyes are looking. But then I also learned through this podcast, speed also reduces your field of view. So when you combine speed with distraction, it's a bit of a recipe for disaster because you're just simply not taking in everything that's coming at you.
And then you add things like fatigue, and fatigue doesn't mean that you didn't sleep well last night necessarily, and that you're tired and you're falling down. That it's obvious. If fatigue is just from doing anything for a period of time, you start losing certain abilities. I was watching it was actually last night. I watched a show online on the Netflix about cruise ships, and they talked about captaining in the night crew, the watch, and that they only do it in 4-hour segments because you cannot continue that level of focus any longer than that. They've determined they change on a regular basis within the crew, and 4 hours is the maximum. Well, how long do we drive? How long are we off being focused on various tasks, and suddenly the drive to and from somewhere is actually where you relax and do less focus. So it's very interesting, in that perspective. But something else that triggered when you were telling me about not noticing things, and you had this is doubling down on something you had said earlier about a bear, which I'm dying to hear the story about a bear. But when I went to the police college, they showed us a video, and they asked us to count how many times a basketball had been thrown between players. And I'll have to edit this in so we can play and show for everybody exactly this clip. And they after the video plays, they say, "And did anyone notice the bear?" And of course, nobody noticed the bear. And it was a person in a bear suit walks through frame. You're so focused on looking at basketballs, you don't see the bear at all.
It's really interesting. So when I first started, so Drop It and Drive, I started, 11 years ago now. And I basically started it because when I was dropping my kids off at their school, we lived in the Lower Mainland at the time, and my youngest was 4 and my oldest was 8. And as a 4-year-old, he's already shorter than the front of most of the vehicles driving off and on that school campus. It was a 10-acre campus. And as a parent, I think any parent out there can relate to the fact I will do anything to protect my kids. Like, I will face my worst fear if it keeps my kids safe. And as teachers, you're preparing these children and these young minds, for their future. So I was really astounded in September of 2010, after I dropped off my 4-year-old and I'm walking around the campus for 2 hours because there's no sense driving all the way home. And I'm watching other parents, teachers, and administrators driving off and on the campus, and they've got their phones in their hands. They've got a breakfast sandwich in one hand, a cup of coffee in the other. They're driving with their elbows. And I just thought, this just doesn't make sense to me. Like, these kids are relying on us to keep them safe, and this is the behavior engaging in. And then of course my cuteness kicks in, and it's like, that's illegal. Why are you still doing that? And so I came up with the idea for Drop It and Drive, and I didn't call it Drop the Phone and Drive because I wanted it to be more than just the phone. And I recognized, even not having Robyn's background in road safety and research and in criminology and all that, I wanted it to be about more than the phone, because I already had an understanding, like just seeing the cup of coffee and the sandwiches, like, people just need to focus on driving. I'd been hit twice, dealing with chronic pain, for over a decade and a half at that point. And no one else should have to go through that. And it's so preventable. So the whole idea for Drop It and Drive kind of came into my head, and I partnered with RCMP, the Surrey RCMP, and Surrey Fire Service, because I wanted people from your line of work, Sean, not for shock and awe, but I wanted to put together a presentation that combined the science of distraction, the realities of what you're actually risking. It's not just about getting a ticket. These are lives that are at stake, especially our children. But I also wanted it to be something where you guys were able to share, what do you see on a daily basis? Like, what are you dealing with? And be able to be proactive about it instead of, giving the ticket. And my amazing co-speaker, Tim Bailey from the Surrey Fire Service, he was on the force for 27 years. So he, as he would say, he was literally picking up the pieces at crash scenes. So it's an opportunity to do the education, which you mentioned earlier, that is really important in this. And everything just kind of started to come together. But the game changer for me was 3 months after I started Drop It and Drive. My daughter is 19 now, but she was crash involved by a distracted driver, and I got the call from the crash scene. So that actually ended up completely changing my whole career path. Robyn knows public speaking, never on the radar, not my thing, very much behind the scenes kind of person. But this was just too important. It was one thing when I was crash involved, and it's not like I'm a martyr, but once it impacts your kid, it is absolutely a game changer. And I've watched her go through, she's diagnosed with PTSD. She's got short-term memory loss that she's had to work through, but she's still on the dean's list at university and doing amazing.
That's amazing.
But she's got the chronic pain that I have as well. So when you start looking at distracted driving in particular and what is actually at stake, and we talked a bit at the beginning about fines and penalties going up. When I first started Drop It and Drive, I did research on where's everybody at with these fines. And at the time, Alaska actually had a $10,000 fine, which I was like, what?
I mean, I'm all for making a deterrent. That's a heck of a deterrent. And I wonder if they don't lay any charges as a result of it. Does that mean that everyone just follows the rule?
Right. And we do hear that from police services across the country, right? They're not, anxious to go out there and write a $600, $700, $800 ticket either, right? Because the police officers know in their environment, they have a lot of distractions in the vehicle that they deal with. So it's really hard to also go out and lay those charges sometimes.
Oddly enough, I don't have that problem.
It's since changed in Alaska, but that stuck with me. It's like, how high does the fine have to go to get people to change their behavior? But going back to motivation, for me, motivation is I don't like to break the rules. It's not my thing. Becoming a parent, I want to keep my kids safe. My husband's on the road all the time. I want him to be safe. Everybody needs to get home. That was kind of the underlying message for me, is whatever you need to do when you get behind the wheel of that vehicle to make sure that you and other people get to get home safe, that should be the only priority. So the motivation for people it's just really unique, and I think it's very personal.
I was going to say, it's very different for everybody. There are people who do it because it's the right thing to do, or because they've got their motivations, their friends, their family, they want to go home, and that's great if it works. But if you look at places like, for instance, with criminality, there's places that have a 3-strike rule. You're looking at life behind bars if you do it. Does it change their behavior? There's people who are doing life behind bars because they didn't change their behavior. So it doesn't work for everybody. And obviously we've raised in Ontario all of the fines repeatedly on this offense, and it doesn't change the behavior 100%, but there's obviously fewer people or people who are motivated. So everything's going to be they're a different motivator for different people. I think the big thing is finding a way to communicate and to get the message across and have someone buy into the fact that acknowledge that it's not the right thing to do because you're putting lives at risk, and it could be your own, could be there's so many reasons to go home. For me, anyway, I'm a parent. I have friends. I have family. I don't want that to change in terms of being either impacting them by removing myself from their lives or having them removed from my life. Like it's just, to me, it's obvious, but it's not obvious to everybody. So how do we do it? What do we change? What's the magic wave of the wand that we can do?
So for a magic wave of the wand, I think we could help people focus on their own driving behavior. We often are concerned about other drivers on the road, and yet we don't control any of them. We do control ourselves. And I think one of the gaps when it comes to distraction is drivers and other road users who can also be distracted just don't self-identify. They think they don't drive distracted, and the truth is they probably don't drive distracted most of the time or some of the time, but they forget that reaching across the seat into your purse, that's distraction. Reaching into the back seat to grab a bag and pull it forward, unwrapping whatever it is that you're going to be eating. The conversation even with the passenger in the car, we tend not to notice those moments in our own drive. And I think if we could help people self-assess and self-diagnose, then the campaigns and the education piece would make much more sense. I think the challenge we face right now is a lot of people see the education and they think it's for other drivers and not for their.
Because they're really good drivers. Just ask them.
Right. Surveys show like more than 80% of people would rate themselves as an above average driver. And yet if you spend any time on the road, there is no way that is true. So I think helping people learn to recognize those moments in their car, and then they also think that it's 2 seconds. Everyone knows, more than 2 seconds increases your crash risk. So they think when they're doing something, it's just 2 seconds. But studies have shown it's actually 4 seconds, 8 seconds, 10 seconds, 12 seconds. And that's
It's
a long
time
time.
stands still when you're doing something and you're focused on it instead of what you're supposed to be doing. I think we should have video cameras watching every driver. Mandatory to watching you, whether you're picking your nose, or you're touching your phone, it's going to be recorded. And when they have a crash, it's going to be played in open court, or maybe on television. The truth is that people are not aware of what they're doing. I remember doing an investigation. I went to go pick up some video. There was an unfortunate situation where someone was killed. Someone had driven past a construction site. They killed a worker on that site. But a dump truck operator had video of it. So I went to get that dump truck footage and of their dash cam. And the driver had no idea that the camera was also recording him. And when I reviewed the footage, yes, he did capture the killing of that road worker. And no, he did not hurt anybody in what he was doing. But what was fascinating was watching him on his phone driving a dump truck for 20 minutes prior to capturing that unfortunate incident. So
Right.
we're just not aware, and you do things automatically. Things happen. You respond. You hear that blink of a tweet or a text message, and you don't even realize it. But your eyes are looking for your phone very often. Even if you don't touch the phone, the best thing to do is to completely silence your phone and make it part of your routine to not include it in your drive.
Right. And there's studies that have been done that actually show, they measure how long it takes drivers to re-engage once they've been distracted. And it can take up to 30 seconds for a driver to kind of get their head back in the game and focused on the road and get back into it after they've been distracted by something else.
Well, and I think a great analogy for people that most people could relate to is, and I do this when we present at schools, oil and gas, mining, forestry, this is applicable across any audience, is how many people have got into, we'll call it a heated discussion with a partner or a friend, and it's right up there, and you walk out the door and you slam the door, and is it just gone? It's just all sunshine and rainbows. Like you don't think about I should have said that, or oops, I shouldn't have said that, or it keeps playing in your head. That's how we're wired. So the same thing happens, going back to what you mentioned at the beginning, Sean, about what's going on in our heads and how that impacts our ability to focus on driving. Everything that you experience in your home, in your workplace, where you walked into a chair that you just didn't see, or you were off in your own headspace and someone scares the crap out of you because they come up to you and you didn't see them. They're like, what do you mean you didn't see me? Like, I'm walking right at you. It's like, I wasn't here. All those things that happen outside of the vehicle happen inside the vehicle. You don't stop being that person just because you're driving. So recognizing that when you get in that vehicle, you have to consciously engage everything. And one of the neat things I learned, and Sean, you can probably speak to this from our law enforcement co-speakers, is that at the beginning where you're going through the testing and you have to do like a ride along with your sergeant or your upper line, you have to actually audibly identify everything you're seeing while you're driving. So there's a woman with a black stroller, there's a white Western Star truck up ahead, there's this coming up behind. You actually have to talk through, I think it's like, 10, 15 minutes or something. It's exhausting, so you don't want to do it all the time. But it's a way to show that you actually are seeing everything you need to see in the moment that you're in. Because there was an incident down in the States, the 22-year-old survived, but she was on the phone with her dad and she drove into the side of a moving train.
Wow.
She didn't drive over the railroad tracks and not see the train coming. The train was already there. And she was so engaged in her conversation with her dad, she drove into it and her dad heard it. Wow. And I get goosebumps just even talking about that story. And thankfully, she did survive. But back to what Robyn was talking about, the magic wand, I think part of it is empowering passengers as well to speak up. Say something if your driver's distracted, because the life you save could be yours. Passengers and other people are at more risk of injury and death than the distracted driver. So giving people the information and the tools and the resources and the little tidbits of science that they can use to start that conversation so that they can take control of the fact that you're driving. My life is literally in your hands, and what you're doing is not making me safe. So you just give me the phone or whatever it is.
I am not a good passenger to begin with. I am obviously a control freak. I like driving. After I was in my motorcycle collision, I became hypersensitive. to the point where I was watching everything. It was exhausting to be driving because I was so switched on and worried about the next collision. I hear the screech of tires and I could feel my heart racing. There's a physical response now to driving, having been crash involved, more so than when you manage 10 or 15 or 20 years of driving and you just get to where you're going and no issues, right? It does change things for you, definitely. It's a very marked change for me, and I'm sure for many others as well. I completely lost what I was going to say besides that, but it's amazing how autopilot-like we are in our regular activities, and we just get there. And so many drivers, and I've experienced it myself, where I pull in or I make a turn, I'm like, where was I for the last 5 minutes? Like we don't even pay attention, or we were on. Especially happens to people even when they're on speakerphone. They think that they're not distracted because they're not holding a phone or looking at the phone. But when you're engaged in conversation or actively trying to recall information, you're still not paying attention. You're just getting through the broad strokes and managing not to hit anything sometimes.
Yeah, well, and I think that's the issue of being alert, right? Even when you're driving, you need to maintain a certain level of mental activity to keep yourself alert. Otherwise, yeah, you zone out. And it's like the last 10K I drove, I don't remember it. So I think we underestimate driving because we're comfortable doing it. We do it, pretty much every day. And I think going back to what you said about fatigue, Sean, there's also the issue of complacency, right? You've done it many times. You're driving like that long, boring stretch, like the crew out in the ocean, right? What are they going to run into? So there's a sense of complacency, and I think sometimes we struggle with that when we're driving, and we need to keep ourselves alert and engaged and our head in the game, because you just never really know when something unexpected is going to happen.
So from TIRF and Drop It and Drive's perspective, when you're trying to convey or educate, what is the primary focus? Like, is it just focus on driving? Is it to push or explain the risks? Where do you focus your attention?
Yes. So for us, I'm going to start first, and then I'm going to turn it over to Karen. So for us, the emphasis is really on helping people recognize and self-diagnose when they're distracted. So lots of people will tell you they're great multitaskers. Karen and I talk about this often, and it's what they're doing is not multitasking, it's toggle tasking. Mm-hmm. They're switching their attention back and forth. So how many of you have been, in the kitchen trying to cook, and you're trying to carry on a conversation at the same time, and you have to keep going back and looking at the recipe that you just looked at 8 seconds ago because whatever you read is gone from your head. So that's, just a great experience where you recognize you're distracted. So with the Drop It and Drive program, Karen really does a great job helping people go through some of those exercises where you realize you're not a multitasker. You're switching your attention rapidly back and forth across tasks, and ultimately you're not doing either task very well.
Absolutely, and the thing that I couldn't remember before, I now remember. I talk about the scalpel, and I use this when I talk to my wife, because it seems that only when I prepare my workspace, I like to build things and make things, have a little workshop. I get down, I get to the point, I take the scalpel, and I'm going to do something. I find, and then I hear "Daddy's needed," or "Can you do?" And I have to stop. I go and I take care of what I need. It takes me 10 or 20 minutes to get back to where I'm ready, and that's exactly when they ask me to do something next. So it's a joke in our house, because I'm always, I get to the point where I never get anything done, because I get to the point where I'm ready to use the scalpel and I have to stop to do something else. Anyway, the concept of having to get into a mode to do that task properly and then be disrupted, similar to how when you're focused on something, you're intently paying attention, and then nothing else matters, because I can tell you that I'm reading something, I can't hear my kids. They're talking to me, "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy," until my wife says, "Hey, your kids need you." But that's just amazing as to how well we can exclude other stimulus when we want to. But somehow we want to be distracted when we're driving, because we're willing to listen to anything, the phone, the stereo, the birds chirping, or what have you.
Right. And I mean, I think the other issue that people don't recognize is when you are trying to multitask and do too many things at once, ultimately what happens is your brain becomes full, right? You can only literally process so much information at a time. And when you're driving and you're overwhelmed by information, what happens is your brain just starts filtering it out. But it's not strategically thinking, ooh, that's important, I'll remember that. Ooh, that's not important, I'll get rid of that. It's just saying I'm full and throwing things out, and you have
Something
no
just
idea.
squirts out your ear.
Exactly. But you have no idea if one of those pieces of information that's getting tossed out is actually a pedestrian standing in a crosswalk in front of you. Yeah.
And unfortunately, those are the consequences you can't take back. Those are the things that are going to be involving everyone involved forever and ever. It's funny. I think when I pull people over for cell phone use or speeding or whatever, it must be that information that is lost, that they were doing it. Because every time when I pull them over and say they were speeding, they say they weren't. And every time I pull them over for using their cell phone, they say I wasn't using my cell phone. And it must be that information that they're excluding unintentionally, just before I pull them over. But
we actually did I think it was a really cool pilot program with Victoria Police Department, an offender program. And I'm all about education. The biggest thing for me is, you mentioned about how people are addicted to their phones. And when people find out I do what I do, even when I'm in a group setting, I'm doing a presentation, they'll come up to me all sheepish, like, oh, I'm addicted to my phone. I feel so bad. I'm so sorry. I'm like, I don't mind. You can be addicted to your phone. I'm addicted to chocolate. Own it. It's your thing. Go for it. Don't get between me and my chocolate.
Danger.
But own it. So you're addicted to your phone. Build it into, you get in your car, you put on your seatbelt, you turn your phone on silent, you put it in the glove box. Don't worry about that side of it. Worry about the side that you've recognized this is something you do. Like Robyn was saying, you self-identified this is an issue for you. You can't resist the tweet, the chirp, the whatever it is your phone's making. Even if you don't acknowledge it and do something with it, your brain is still pulled away just because it's heard that sound. Now you're wondering, part of your brain, like Robyn was saying, you can't pick and choose. So part of your brain while you're driving is wondering, was that so-and-so reaching out to me? Was that the appointment confirmed? Was that whatever? And it takes, like you said, Sean, it takes you time to come back in. Well, you don't have that freedom when you're behind the wheel of a vehicle. You have to be fully engaged the whole time. So don't worry about the fact that you're addicted to your phone. I don't mind. Like, you do you, but do something with it. And one of the things I enjoy so much about the presentations, the drop and drive ones we do, and regardless of the age, are the interactive exercises. We have a video up on the Drop It and Drive website that's the beanbag test. And I'm always trying to come up, and I'm brainstorming with Robyn or my co-speakers, like, let's come up with some new fun game. And my Amazon shopping list is hilarious because I order children's puzzles, and my kids are teenagers, and like, why do you have a dinosaur multicolored puzzle? I'm like, oh, I have the best game I just came up with. And you go into a room and you do part of the presentation, but then you bring these highly qualified, experienced drivers up to the front, and you engage them in something that's relatable. So it's like, okay, simple task. Take this orange cork, put it on the purple squares on this 8.5 piece of paper. Take the purple ones, put them on the orange. Easy peasy, right? And they're like, yeah, no problem. You just reverse the color. Okay, so they start doing that. It's like, okay, now, so what's 7 plus 3? And they'll pause sometimes just for a second, or spell peanut butter, and they'll spell peanut, but not butter. Or they won't even consciously choose, I'm going to focus and I'm going to get every cork right. And I had one guy, I said, can you spell chocolate? He goes, nope. And he's just sorting his corks.
Well, and it's interesting watching those exercises because you can literally see them stop sorting to answer the question, and then they go back to sorting, and then they stop sorting to answer the question, and they don't know they're doing it, but everybody around them is watching them pause, and it's a great teachable moment. And you learn that some people can't spell really well.
I keep the questions really simple, and I usually bring up the highest ranking person in the room. So if the president and CEO is in there, I'm like, let's go, let's do this, so that they know this isn't about what level you're at or what you're doing. This is a reality for every human. You have a limited capacity to process cognitively demanding tasks, even at the most basic level. And once they experience it, it's a fun environment. I'm sure they're feeling the waves of support coming from all their colleagues. They're laughing their heads off at them. they forgot to spell the butter part, or they missed sorting the red and yellow bean bags, or whatever it is. But then you get into having conversations, and then you
Sure.
start finding yourself having these epiphany moments. And I can literally look out in the audience and I can see light bulbs coming on, like, oh, that explains this situation.
Why I can't do that.
Yeah.
And it's that light bulb moment when they get it, but you have to put them in a situation where they can get it. So we just need that for everybody else. And there's got to be a way to do it. Like, my kids know that you don't use a cell phone while you drive, and they're young. But somehow that fades, or we miss the boat with everybody else. I remember when my buddy had a phone in his car, and it was a phone. It was little, and you had a one button on it. You spoke to the operator, and you told him the key, because that was a it wasn't even called a cellular phone. What was it called? It was a mobile phone. And you had an operator you spoke to, and everybody could hear your phone call. And I've seen the introduction of this technology, and I've seen what it's done, and I've witnessed it, in terms of investigating collisions and seeing what the bad things that can happen. But we don't necessarily get that reality check with everyday living, especially as we say, someone who's had near miss. Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say, so one of the most visually descriptive studies that I've seen to really capture that was a study done here in Ontario, and the researcher put a functional MRI. They hooked a person up to a functional MRI so you could see their brain activity in a simulator, and had them do a simulated drive and do some distracting tasks. So you can see when they're not distracted, when they're driving, a lot of their brain activity is in the back of their brain. So that's like your motor coordination and visual scanning and so forth. And then when they introduced the distracting task, you'd kind of see that, like, the lights in the back of their brain dim, and the front part of your brain where you're thinking, your decision making takes over, right? So you can literally see the shift in mental resources from the back to the front of your brain while you're distracted while you're driving. And it was just so visually captures exactly what's happening in your head. And I think that's something I use often when I'm presenting to help people understand what exactly they're doing.
What's the bear story? Because we talked about the bear in my story, but I want to hear the bear in the other story.
Okay, so there's two bear stories. The first one, well, really neither are mine, but first one is a news story out of the States, and the media, they're in a helicopter and they're filming. I can't remember why they're filming. They're doing some
A bear on the loose. It was a bear on the loose in like a residential area. Bear on the loose.
Right.
Yeah.
It was the bear. The bear was the star of the story. So there's this big black bear on the loose somewhere down in the States. And then as the camera pans over to the entryway of the house, which was separated from the driveway by a large shrub, you see this young guy, not too young, like a young adult, walking out, and he's got his nose buried in its phone, and he's just texting away, and he's walking towards the bear, and the bear's walking towards him, and then all of a sudden the bear kind of disappears behind the shrub, and he's still walking. And I mean, just kind of based on the speed that they're both going, they got real close before this guy suddenly looks up. He's like, "Oh crap, bear!" And
It was a very stealthy bear.
Very stealthy.
Like, he didn't hear the bear, and he didn't hear the helicopter overhead either.
Heard nothing. So that was a good one. But the other one was, we were doing a presentation of the forest industry, and one of the things you were asking about drop-in and drive. So obviously, distracted driving is a big part of it, but we do delve into, especially with our younger audiences and passengers, distracted walking, and just distractions in the workplace. At one of the forestry companies we work with, when we got there, we were up in northern Alberta, and we got out of the vehicle and we walked across to the building, and there's like massive machinery going this way and that way. And somebody walked through the parking lot texting on their phone. And I just thought, oh, that's kind of interesting. Mentioned it in passing. And then the company actually put in a rule, no phones when you're walking through the parking lot. I'm like, oh, that's like instant. They've been doing this for years, and no one had ever really thought that, oh yeah, this is something we should address. So the bear story, though, we were doing actually a workshop to help safety professionals present on this issue at their tailgate safety meetings and all that. And so we gave them the tools and facilitated the session on how that they can make it relatable, because we present to all industries, but clearly I'm not a forester, I'm not a professional truck driver, I'm not a miner. So what we share is information in a highly sophisticated industry that already knows about safety, but we're sharing what they don't know. So we give it to them, and then they apply it to their industry based on their experience. So this this one team put together their presentation, and their example they used for distracted walking was their choice, was up on a cut block where a lot of their guys would listen to music. And the fellow was listening, and they're allowed to, and he was, marking whatever needed to be marked, and they're way up on this cut block. And I don't know what they're like back out there, but out here in BC is a lot of like straight vertical situations and all that in the mountains. It's pretty treacherous.
I avoid mountains for a reason.
Yeah. And this guy was just so into his tunes, and he was close to one of these drop-offs that he didn't hear a bear come up behind him. And what actually saved his life was that drop-off, because the bear came up and like, hey, I'm here. And he jumped with a start and rolled down that embankment, and the bear just decided, now you're not worth it, or, whatever. I don't like your taste in music.
Well, we don't know what the bear wanted. He may have just needed a Grey Poupon or something like that.
Right? It's like, high five. I like that tune you're playing. But just helping people, again, understand it's distracted driving is definitely, it's the, a priority issue, but just distraction in general. What's keeping you safe in your workplace, regardless of where it is the error that can be made something that is critical. If you are cognitively distracted, if your head's just not in the game, if you're in the medical industry, obviously that can be really significant. So it's just coming up with these relatable but really fun ways to help people, like Robyn said, self-identify, like, oh, now I can put myself in that. Oh, I remember I was working in the backyard listening to tunes, and the neighbor was like yelling at me like, hey, your dog's running loose, and I didn't hear it. Or like you were saying, my husband's like you, Sean, he can be reading something and he just doesn't hear anything. And I'm like, how is that possible? Like, I'm so tuned into my kids, I hear them.
I'll tell you what, my wife gets upset with me if I don't hear them when they're speaking, because she sees them and hears them and knows that they're. But then the funny thing is, I catch her doing the exact same thing. She'll be looking at her phone, intently trying to concentrate on something, and everything fades away. And I'll say, hello, 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 and no one hears anything. And then, what do you mean? Oh, you were speaking? So everyone is susceptible to this. And it's fantastic that we have the ability to, because I'm sure that's the only reason I was able to study, was being able to exclude everything else. This is before, sound isolating or sound fancy headphones that make it so I don't have to hear anybody else talking. I don't need that. My brain does great things about it. So it is interesting. And I don't know what the perfect excuse is. Like we talk about, excuse isn't the right word, solution, because these devices are no longer just telephones. It's the problem is that we rely on them for so much. And social media, I love getting notified when we get likes and comments, and it's become part of my day to engage on social media. So I look forward to it. But I don't want to do it when I'm driving, and and I'm not talking to somebody every minute. So what's the excuse? Why do I need this? What is the draw? I don't know.
I think it's FOMO. Yeah. Fear
That's
of missing
interesting.
out. It's not just a kid thing or a teen thing. And when we talk to schools, one of the first things out of any one of the speakers' mouths is, we're not here because you're the problem. You might be part of the problem if you choose to be, but we're here because you're the solution. So again, going back to that magic wand, what is the solution? It's getting this information in front of them as early as possible. I mean, presenting to elementary schools, super fun. One of the great things about kids that age is they have no social filter. They are not concerned about whether or not what they're saying is politically or even socially correct. They will just say it. So
my 5-year-old is confirmation of that.
Oh, right. Absolutely. And Kylie, like I said, she was 8 when she was hurt. And one of the first things we did to raise awareness in BC, and with Kylie as an artist, we did a poster contest. And so back then, Drop It and Drive was like, we weren't even a guppy. We were like tadpole in a very large sea of road safety. So I just emailed all the superintendents of schools across BC, and I'm like, hey, I'm doing this poster contest. Kids, kindergarten to grade 7. I want to know what they're seeing. What did they see when they're, a captive audience in a vehicle? I got 450 posters from kids within a month. doing this poster contest, and let me tell you, they threw their parents under the proverbial bus. There was just no concern whatsoever. I had posters of moms drinking a glass of red wine. I don't want to be like this when I grow up. And I had everything from really funny stuff to just heartbreaking. A cousin who was killed by a distracted driver. So it scares me when I see my mom or dad use their phone. And for me, I choke up when I think about it. And this was like 11 years ago now. But these kids have the capacity to not only create change now by speaking up, but they also have the capacity that once they become of driving age, they've been learning about the risks of some of these behaviors since they were in kindergarten, whether it's through a poster contest or a presentation or whatever it is, that by the time they hit 16 or whatever, wherever they are in Canada and they're driving, they're already well aware of the risks and the consequences and what it took for them to change their parents' behavior. And I had one teacher, one of their students won one of the levels of the contest at their grade, and she actually turned the poster contest and all the resources that I gathered on Drop It and Drive, which by the way is now way better because we're with TIRF, and TIRF has way more information than I ever got access to. But she actually turned it into a 2-week curriculum for her kids. And then she emailed me, and I still have the email to tell me that one of her little guys went home and convinced his mom to never touch her phone again while driving. And he came back in, and he was so proud that he
rightfully so.
So, I say one of the magic things is we got to get this. Don't disregard kids just because they're young. They see and hear everything, and any parent knows that. So why not get them on board with road safety right out of the gate?
I love it. I want to know when the coloring books. We talked about that last time. The coloring books are coming out. When that happens, I want to get those to my kids.
Wait. Kylie did a great piece of art actually that we've used that captured kind of how her experience being crash involved affected her.
Okay.
So Karen, I think you should show that because it's really a fantastic piece of art.
I will. Yeah.
Send it to me. I'll throw it on screen.
I will. Yeah. Called it The Road, and it's very poignant, and we tied it actually into the release through our Canadian Coalition on Distracted Driving. We did a couple of fact sheets on the impact of preventable collisions on first responders and PTSD, critical incident stress, CIS, and all that. And this was from her perspective, how she sees things through the eyes of a young person dealing with PTSD. And the fact it's my kid, I'm both proud and sad that this is her reality. But the fact she could put it, you're right, Robyn, it's just an incredible piece of artwork that really tells the story of, this isn't about getting a ticket. Distracted driving isn't about the inconvenience of being pulled over or the embarrassment or the cost or the points or any of that stuff. This is about a behavior that creates preventable collisions and injuries that you can't take back and lives lost that you can't get back. And every stat you see that comes out, and TIRF does these wonderful road safety monitor reports that takes polls of what are the attitudes of Canadians. They're not just numbers. Those, when you start looking at the fatality database that TIRF manages, and you see those numbers, it's people. It's the three of us here. When you look at the number of people lost every day, I think I would just challenge people to look around them and just consider, what if that was one of you?
And that's the thing. It's not the three of us. It's the three of us and our families and the people who interact with our families, and it cascades. It's communities. It's huge. The ripple effect of one person, one life lost is enormous. Co-workers and extended. I mean, it just goes on, and it's heartbreaking. And we've been to far too many as a police officer, and police officers around the world are involved with so many heartbreaking situations. And it's easy to say that's sad and move on when it's not someone that you're directly touched by. But you see the heartbreak. I mean, I don't want to go down this road. It's absolutely heartbreaking, and that it happens far too many times and regularly. And it doesn't look like there's any end in sight. So, which is why the education is so important, so we can change hearts and minds and get people to accept and buy in. I will tell you something interesting. There's two things I want to talk about. One deals with technology. I want to talk about the fact that there's all this voice technology. You don't ever have to touch it, but it's still distraction. Even if you're talking to your phone, which people think it's, you can just, it's suddenly safe. It's still a distraction, but it's far better than actually taking your eyes off the road and touching the phone. So do you think that being able to talk to Siri or Google or whatever is any benefit, or is it still nothing is better than even that?
So those types of technologies in the vehicle also come with risks, and it's because of how well they work and the quality of the human-machine interface. So Dr. David Strayer out of the University of Utah has done a number of really comprehensive studies looking at current modern day vehicles, newer vehicles, with the bells and whistles and the different types of technologies and voice assistants and that they have in there, and the quality of the human machine interface is not great. And I think everyone who's used these technologies has had the experience where they've had to repeat multiple times what they're saying, and it's the device still doesn't register what you're saying. We were talking the other day, Karen, about one of the voice recording of something we were doing. She was saying Kylie said, but when the voice recorder came out, it said kamikaze.
Hey.
It's like not even close. So
we're turning it into a game. Whatever it is, I actually don't correct it anymore. I got tired of it back in the day when I had devices that were not so good. Yeah, I would just let it go and see what happened. You get these answers going, what? But I do appreciate the technology that does it. But I am of the mind that I tend to end my things, or either begin or end, by saying this is being transcribed by Siri. You get what you get, and I just give it to or voice notes, or there's lots of different options. But I don't want to touch my phone. I don't want it to be involved.
The research showed with those technologies is actually people would spend a lot of time actually looking at the technology, looking at the screen, and trying to troubleshoot while they're driving. So their eyes would be off the road for up to 30 seconds, and it's like that's really not safe. So a lot of the technologies that we're seeing, they have potential, but really the quality of the human machine interface and how intuitive it is to use is what's going to make or break us in terms of.
So if it's good, it's better. When it's bad, it may be a distractor and worse. And the real answer is leave it to later. I mean, you don't need to do anything.
Well, when it comes to GPS as well, like, don't forget, a wrong turn is just a wrong turn. It's not the end of the earth. You do 3 rights, you get back on. Like, I see vehicles, they just go like from the far left lane and they go shooting over to the exit. They don't miss it. It's like what is so important that you would do that?
And the easiest solution for all of that is give yourself extra time. Plan ahead. If you don't know where you're going, that's great. Just give yourself extra time and you'll be fine. And certainly those maneuvers that are, I put them on whenever I get one sent to me. I put it up on TikTok because it's amazing to me that these people survive every day and continue to go on the road and are willing.
I have a short local story for you here from Nanaimo. So I was flying out east, and I actually ended up being interviewed on the plane by CBC because the story came out while I was in transit. But this young woman on our major Island Parkway highway, she decided to curl her hair while driving. And for way back in the 80s, so I'm really dating myself, you had the Braun cordless curling irons with that little plug-in thing.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so
those are the gas-powered ones, right? The ones butane? Yeah.
Butane.
Anyone who's been anywhere near those, no, they are hot. Like a single quarter-second touch, and you feel that. So she's got both hands, and she's doing 90 down the highway, and a passenger in the vehicle beside her had filmed it and then provided the information to the police. And I'm guessing they went and had a little education chat with her. But I often, when we were talking through that, and I'll bring it up because it's like, this is like 1980s technology here, people. We're not talking about cell phones. This is a behavior-based issue. Mm-hmm. This is her belief that she didn't get up early enough, like you said, Sean, to get her makeup on and her hair done and all that. So her choice was, well, I'll just do it while I'm driving down the highway. And it's like, you don't get to do that. That's not okay. So trying to get people to recognize, phones are definitely an issue, but this is not about technology. This is about people's mindsets and their choices and their inability to recognize This is a highly risky behavior. And for that type of person, what will make them stop? Will the education session with the officer, if that's what happened, make it stop? Or is she going to have to be crash involved before she realizes you cannot be curling your hair while you're doing
And some
tiny
folks
down
just
the
won't
highway?
learn ever. It's just
Yeah.
simple. But I'll tell you, last couple of days, I put up videos on TikTok specific to handheld communication device. Someone had asked about the points and how long they last and understanding the fines, so we explained that. And then there were so many angry comments about the fact that, well, police do it all the time. They're distracted driving. And I explained in Ontario, and I don't know where it is, how it is elsewhere, but I assume it'll be similar. There's exemptions for law enforcement to communicate. They need to do it. There's vital information that we need to get access to, and as such, we're allowed to. Well, that just set people off. So I had a follow-up video explaining that it's not for when we want to order pizza. It's for getting important information related to the emergency call we're on. And here's the funny thing, and I haven't done a follow-up video yet. But there's a belief that, and actually I was impressed at how much of a belief there was that cell phones are bad. But they said you should be using your police radio and you have a police computer. That's what that's for. Not realizing that those are also distractions and they're covered under the same exemption for using the cell phone. But why is it okay for me to? I mean, I know why it's okay because it's requirement. I need to get that information because I'm going to go help someone that could die if I don't get there in time. Who could be being beaten? Could be in a car accident. That could be. I need to get certain information, like where I'm going. But the concept that don't use your cell phone, that's bad. Use the walkie-talkie, that's okay. Use the computer,
handheld.
that's. But to the point where they're calling us hypocrites. You have tools, use those tools. There's somehow a disconnect. Anything you do other than driving is distraction. There's just an acceptance, there's an exclusion or a permission to do it for the people that are required. That's not to say everyone should be doing it, and that's a big deal. Some people just don't like the fact that we can do something that they can't. That's a different thing.
But the other thing too, Sean, is you also get a lot of professional training when it comes to driving on a closed course. So you get hours and hours and hours of driving with a professional instructor that you don't get, like other people don't have. So I think, you're also trained to be able to do that. And that's not necessarily that it makes it safer, but you're more informed about the issue. And you are trained to actually respond. And there's a lot of muscle memory that goes into that as well. So it's different. And then, driving a motorcycle, you also learn to drive defensively. So
Sure.
I'd say the driving skills that police officers have.
We're professional drivers.
You're professional drivers, and that's the average driver can't say that.
Well, and I'm curious too, Sean, how many people complain about the fact that you carry a handgun?
As
an officer?
We're allowed to, and they're not. Yeah.
I can't do that. So to me, it is. It's kind of like it's not a buffet of laws, right? Like police, you are trained and you need to use certain tools, but also as the people who have to deliver the NOKs, you are highly sensitized to what is at risk, more so I think than anybody else. So if you're using those tools in the in the course of your duties, like you said, there's a life at risk or there's something. If I pick up the phone and call 911, I want you to get here as fast as you can, as safely as you can. I can't afford for you, if someone has broken into my home and they're threatening me and my kids, for you to pull over safely, put your car in park and take the call. And I also understand that the radios, and it might be different in Ontario, there's a limited amount of lines or something, like how much information can go back and forth. So
we have a number of operators and we have many people on the air and they all need information, and you can't have a dialogue where they explain, go to the rear door on the right. I mean, you can in certain situations, but we're all tied to that information. We're dispatched by computer, and there's a requirement to get that information. And yes, we have the ability of having a quick thing when we're not just kicking back and watching a movie. And that's why I use the example of ordering pizza. It's not just for fun. I'm not doing something because I want to. I'm doing things I need to. And if we reduce the number of people who are doing it by having it only being police, fire, ambulance who are utilizing this for a good reason, it's not calling to tell my cousin to feed the dog because I forgot to. We're reducing the exposure We're limiting it to when we need to. And when the average person's upset that we're doing it, there's an assumption, and the comments were, oh, you're just calling your wife to see what's for dinner. No, and that would be irresponsible, and that's not something we're doing. And listen, there's going to be people who abuse it. The problem is everyone on the road seems to be abusing it, and that just makes it an incredibly dangerous environment. We also hear about speeding. Why are police allowed to speed? Because we need to speed to do certain things. Again, well, you should put your lights on. Well, putting your lights on might make it more dangerous. It's a lot to do with, I want to do what you can do. And that becomes a problem.
Yeah.
I had the opportunity, I was going to say real quick, I had the opportunity a few months ago. I got to go to the police college out in Ontario and actually get in a vehicle and do some training and do this like spin out in water, which I've never done in the eyes sport and all that. It took me like 3 times and it was super cool. But that doesn't mean that I'm out on the road the next time it rains and I'm going to be like, hey, I know how to do this, so I'm just going to give this a little 360 spin. But it was really interesting to see and experience firsthand just how in depth the training is to become a police officer. Like you said, it doesn't make you infallible, but it's certainly well above and beyond anything anybody else on the road has.
It gives you a different perspective. You know, training in skid school and being someone who has gone lights and sirens to things, you're aware of different things. And you also know how scary it is. It is not something to take lightly to go lights and sirens to a call. I remember my first time we were going to a gun call, and I was the passenger, and I was wide-eyed. I was not happy because you never know what anyone else is going to do. And trying to get somewhere with lights and sirens, knowing that people don't always see, because they're focused on their cell phones and doing things. It is a scary, at times, event to be going lights and sirens to help someone. And knowing that the longer it takes you to get there, the higher the probability of that person not being there to save at the end. You know, not catching the person who's breaking the law, not saving the person who needs you. It's a lot of stress.
Yeah.
People, I don't think understand. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I just wanted to jump in. So we've talked a lot about the consequences, and just to put that in perspective, you know, more than 400 people die every year on our roads as a result of distracted driving. And we tend to think of it being, young people or males. And here's some interesting facts. Drivers of all ages are distracted. And when you look at the fatality data, you see that it's not just young drivers, it's drivers of all ages. We tend to think that it's mostly men, and for a lot of road safety problems that we have, the larger proportion of the problem is often male, but when it comes to distraction, slightly larger proportion are women.
Interesting.
Which is interesting. And the most important thing I think people need to understand is, in a distracted driving fatality, it's often the non-distracted road user who dies. So we think about impaired driving, and in more than 60% of those cases, it's the impaired driver who dies. That's not true for distraction. It's often the other road user who wasn't distracted, who was trying to make it home, who ends up being killed. And so we literally have other people's lives in our hands when we are out there on the road and we make a conscious choice to be distracted.
It is a serious topic. It's a problem, obviously, we're seeing everywhere. I hope that we can, continue to draw attention to it so we can help it be, I guess, such a it's
socially unacceptable.
That's what I'm looking at. It has to be something.
I knew it. I was
all
reading
buy
your
into
minds.
it.
I was reading
it's
your
good.
mind,
You got that psychic course. I'm waiting. It's next week. I'm enrolled.
I aced it.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's all about getting people to accept that it's a problem, to acknowledge their own participation level, because to some degree, whether it's your cell phone or daydreaming or having a speakerphone call, whatever that is you're doing other than the task at hand of driving, it's putting everyone at risk. And I look forward to doing more of these talks with you, because there's so much we need to talk about. There's so much information that you have that we need to help educate and get everybody on the same team, because it's roads are a shared resource. We're all there with the intention of getting to where we want to go, to the people we love, to the worker, to our jobs, so we can make the money to pay for the things we want. Like, it's all interconnected. It's just one big blob of we're trying to live life and be happy.
Yep.
Well, one of the many things I've learned from Robyn, and I said earlier about if your driver's distracted, say something. The life you save could be yours. But also, I'll lob the ball to you here, Robyn, because you can explain it way better. But it's not just about speaking up and choosing for yourself, but when you talk to your peer group about why you do or don't do what you do.
Yeah.
Take it away, Robyn.
Okay. So we are all powerful, all of us, and the choices that we make and are speaking up about them influences the behavior of people around us. And there have been a number of research studies that show that we can actually influence people to make safer choices. So if someone thinks driving using their cell phone is okay and they do it regularly and they're comfortable with it, if their peer group says, oh, I would never use my cell phone while driving, that's dangerous, just the other day this happened or that happened, and you miss half the information in your field of view, literally because it shrinks when you're distracted, that person would be less inclined to then continue to use their cell phone and drive. So we all have the opportunity to speak up about those choices and why we do them.
I got a new campaign. We're going to ask people to become social influencers. Everyone's on social media. They want to be influencers. Let's actually influence. I was watching a show again about it was a magician on Netflix, and he was talking about how he can influence social media influencers. Fascinating. I don't remember the name of it. That's how fascinating it was. No, it was really good. But the truth is, we're doing things every day, and everyone's watching. We talked about it last time we spoke, that our kids are watching, our friends are watching. Be the best example you can be. Be that role model. Be an influencer. And influence the good behavior, because you might save a life, and it may not just be your own, maybe someone you care about. We can keep going on and on. These are great, and I don't know how long we've been talking, but it's been a while. We should probably call it quits for this episode, because there won't be anything to talk about. We'll do it again soon, though. Now I've got the new thing. We got a campaign about social influencer, and what you said last time, I think Karen, it was you who said, talking about power. I still think there's huge power in making these decisions to take control of what you can control, and make the world safer, the roads safer for everyone based on choices you make. And there's power in that, and I think that we should be proud of ourselves when we do the things. It's not goofy or sentimental to make choices for safety. In high school, maybe they would point to us and say, "Wow, you're being a goody two shoes." But the truth is, anything we do has real serious repercussions, and I don't want a part of that. At least not in a bad way. Thank you again so much. We'll do it again soon. And TIRF is TIRF.ca. That's where we can find you. Of course, we put it on screen. Drop It and Drive. Is that a separate individual site, or is it a subsection of?
It's actually blending, because I joined TIRF over 5 years ago. So you can find it through dropitanddrive.com or dyad.tirf.ca. But it's also, you can link to it by just going to tirf.ca.
Awesome. Well, they're all going to be on the screens. The socials I'll put up as well. And we'll put this up everywhere. And I look forward